So I guess my talk today is maybe to explain why I'm so damn crazy. Going to explain it in some simple stories because there's just so many stories of conflict. Excuse me. The first story is about religion and food. What's more improbable than me being here at a hospitality conference is the fact that I entered the culinary universe at all. When I was growing up in Virginia, my father wanted me to be a professional golfer. He basically worked 30 years of his life in restaurants to make sure I would never step foot in one as an employee. My mother had slightly different hopes. She tried very hard for me to be a musician, a banker, a lawyer, typical Asian American immigrant values for their kids. My other relatives had opinions about my future too. Everyone wanted me to be a minister or a missionary, like many of my cousins and my sister. They were extremely religious. I did settle on that path in a way when I decided to major in religion as an undergrad. But I knew it wasn't so I could be religious. It was to learn very precisely how and why I shouldn't be religious. And to equip myself with all the rhetorical tools I needed to debate with my family. To be honest, I rarely studied at all. I had a great time in college. But there was one course called The History of Christian Thought in the West by a professor named Frank Kirkpatrick. And it ended up being extraordinarily useful to me in my life, even though I missed most of the classes since it was at 8:30 in the morning. I wound up getting like a C in it. And one of the few days that I was there, I learned about this theological principle called via negativa. In Latin, that translates to the negative way. And as he explained it, early theologians used this mechanism as a way to describe God by pointing out what he was not. I promise you, I'm not going to talk about theology and my poor grasp of it. But it was pivotal in getting me to understand how I could use it as a conflict, as a platform to understand conflict and change in my life. Young, dumb, confused, and stubborn as I was, I figured that if it was good enough for theologians to understand God, their life, it was probably going to be good enough for me to use to understand what I wanted to do with my life, as many 20-year-olds tried to figure out. It validated taking on a contrarian point of view and encouraged me to finally, completely put the blinders on and not think about everyone else's opinion. It gave me the courage to be myself, as neurotic and crazy as I am, to follow my intuition, to stop being a wallflower, which, believe it or not, is my default setting. I won't bore you with the biographical connective tissue about what came after college, but suffice to say that it allowed me to embrace cooking as my path because I found it to be very truthful, I found it to be very meaningful, and I just never thought I would find something like that. But even after that journey began, conflict presented itself in a different form. In my training, I basically brainwashed myself that thinking that high-end French dining and hospitality was the pinnacle of food. Nothing else mattered. I was embarrassed about any other kind of food, particularly food that I grew up eating, which was Korean, some Japanese. Deep down, I didn't feel like I would ever work. Deep down, I didn't feel like the food that I grew up eating would ever work, right? It just didn't seem valid. And it wasn't a game I ultimately could win. Because it wasn't that long ago where really good food was only at the fanciest spots. But then I got to travel, eating around. I got to cook abroad. And on those trips, some of my favorite experiences were in the small hutong restaurants in Beijing, little ramyenyas in Tokyo, and the variety of street carts in Seoul. These were places that offered great food and great hospitality, but in a way that was completely different from what I had come to know and aspire in the West. This was when the internet had not yet made it possible to know every single thing about restaurants in far-flung places. It was a revelation to me that food of the highest quality could be done cheaply, affordably, with love and care, that there was more than one way to make a customer happy. That changed my world. So in 2004, basically thanks to my battles with a series of conflicts, Momofuku Noodle Bar was born, which, as you can tell from Tosi's opening story, I had a lot of anger there. I'm working on it. The restaurant itself presented a conflict, or via negativa. At a time when most people would say excellent food could only be found at expensive restaurants, we tried to propose something else. And we did it by focusing on something completely uncool, like ramen and buns. In a part of town in the East Village, no one would ever associate with quality gastronomy. The second story starts off with, the 1980s PSA, Don't Do Drugs campaign. Does anyone remember when the dad walks into the room? The kid's playing air drums. The dad says, basically, what is this? Angrily questions his son about how he learned to use drugs. After some hesitation, the kid shouts, You all right? I learned it from watching you. And the narrator says, parents who use drugs have children who use drugs. For me and my friends, that PSA announcement for the next 20 years was a constant source of comedy. Literally every day, someone would drop that line. Little did I know or realize it would wind up haunting me, and not for the reasons you would expect. See, at Momofuku, the half-baked idea of conflict I developed using, the half-baked idea I developed as an inspiring young cook who had barely earned a liberal arts degree, led to unexpected success. I was so evangelical about it that we came up with 3 core values that suggest conflict: fearing apathy, embracing failure, and challenging convention. That was really the core of what we believed in. Our endeavors seemed to work because we willed them, because we had the boneheaded but deeply felt conviction that we're just going to work harder than anyone else. No one was going to take that away from us. Even if we didn't have the money to properly finance our projects, even if we didn't have nice silverware or decent spaces to cook out of, even if nothing about the circumstances we faced or decisions we made would make you think we'd survive. Example number 1, just look at Momofuku Sambar. We opened up 2 years later in 2004. It started out as a vaguely burrito restaurant with my crazy idea that I could make Korean food and Chinese food in burrito form. I was just 10 years too early. Then this restaurant failed, and then transitioned into a late night space from 12 to 4 in the morning, because we had to pay back the loans. We did anything and everything to make ends meet. Somehow, it received 2 stars, New York Times, and then 3 stars, New York Times. That pissed off a lot of people. And I'm not sure, I even believe that. No one really thinks that's true, but that's how crazy that time was. In fact, Sambar placed at the highest ranking in the top 50 at number 26 in the world. And it beat out the French Laundry at 32, and that screwed up my world, right? Iconic French Laundry, Thomas Keller, one of the reasons I got into cooking. To this day, that episode has never felt quite right. The public, the press, and young cooks saw something romantic, even seductive about what we were doing. Or at least they felt it was a worthwhile spectacle, like watching a lunatic scale a building in Midtown. I would literally meet up with journalists who were doing stories about us And I'd spend the entire time sweating and running around and basically saying, fuck this, I hate this, I don't know what the hell's happening. I still say that. And then somehow, magically, these absolutely beautiful stories would come out of it. It's still confusing to me. What I've come to believe about all of this is that our success seemed like a low barrier of entry. At least we were being honest. I mean, all it took was hard work. And so we kept doubling down on conflict. We started scheduling into our lives, deploying it wherever there was room for it, doing things like having people who intensely disliked each other work closely, made them partners all the time. It didn't matter that I had every kind of stress disorder or psychosomatic ailment, or that working this way killed any hope of a personal life that didn't involve a bar from 2 to 5 a.m. I couldn't enjoy a day off. I didn't take time off because I felt guilty. So in order to fill that void, I worked harder. Work and conflict became everyone's addiction. Like that stupid PSA, don't do drugs campaign, all my cooks had learned a great deal from me. They were watching every move, and that was really hard for me to understand. I didn't think anyone would want to work like me or be like me. The last story is about growing up. In 2012, I wanted to prove that my idea of conflict could work anywhere, even across the world. And just to show you our strategic growth model in 2012, we opened up our first restaurant outside New York City in Sydney, Australia. And I shit you not, I looked at a map and I went like this. Sydney and New York is not that far away. So stupid. Not only that, we were going to open a restaurant in a part of Sydney no one wanted to go to. It was, at the time, before it was refurbished, a casino that locals did not enjoy frequenting. We had been given the option to open up anywhere in the new rebuilt casino, and I chose the least favorable part. I told myself we were going to work with those odds and open the best restaurant in Australia. And if the restaurants in New York were charged with tension, in Sydney you could feel the stress from outside the door. Everything about the operation flew in the face of the joy and chill vibes that permeate Sydney. It's one of the happiest places in the world. And at the beginning, this is basically like a story of Goldilocks, and it really happened. We were hiring for a chef de partie position, and I really like keeping it lean because I want to add as we go. I don't like having overstaffed. And the team was almost complete. We had just like the killer lineup of people. And we needed one more cook. And on Monday, we had this kid that came in, and he showed up at 9 a.m. unpacking his bags. And then I think we're all there in the morning, and he says, "What time are we leaving today?" And I said, you're leaving now. In terms more vulgar than I'll share with you today. I thanked him for showing up and said we will not be offering him the job. Tuesday, another trail. About a few hours into it, he comes up to me and says, "Hey, if we offer him the job, could he get Mondays and Fridays off?" I thought someone was playing a joke on me. He didn't want to throw off his surfing schedule with his mates. I said he could have as many days off as he wants. Wednesday, the third day, we had a trail. Probably one of the best trails I've ever seen. And I think he's like one of the top chefs in Australia now. We had a young cook waiting for us at the door. He was just waiting for us. We hadn't even shown up yet. He went on to prove himself as, without question, someone that was super organized, very, very sharp knives. He had great flow in the kitchen. He asked all the right questions. He took notes. You could tell that this kid loved food. He loved being in the kitchen. That gave me so much joy. He was the kind of cook that was harder on himself than anyone else could ever be. He was the kind of cook that you could tell when they made a mistake, wouldn't be able to sleep at night. That's the guy I want to build around. Top it all off, he made one of the best family meals I've ever had. And he stayed to the bitter end to clean. And I remember telling my guys, like, oh, we found it. This guy's awesome. We found the missing piece. I offered him the job, and he declined. Very calmly and gracefully, he explained that he was recently married, and he wanted to have some balance in his life. That if this was the kind of work needed to be successful here, then this was not the kind of success he wanted. I was speechless, but mostly very, very angry. I didn't even understand it. We went on to work like maniacs that year, and in the end wound up winning all the accolades possible. We were making beautiful food, and it was the first time in my life that I was blessed to know, since we're in a room full of FOH, how a strong floor could actually turn our restaurant into something fantastic. And I would argue that that opening year, our front of the house staff was better than the kitchen. That was exciting. It should have been one of the highlights of my life. Yet for some reason, it all felt hollow. It sounds hokey, but not a day went by without me remembering that third trail. I usually batted away and dismissed the guy. But the more I started unpacking that moment, and the more I started to understand it, it kept on coming back to me. As I saw members of the original team, because we've been open about 6 years now, leave, onto more different projects or places that were a little bit more chill, I started to see my own unhappiness compound. I had no choice but to give that cook some credit. I was so wrapped up in this idea of conflict, my own narcissism, that I brought misery with me to Sydney, a place that is like intensely amazing. When I finally registered that what worked for me in the beginning was unsustainable, my frantic knee-jerk reaction was, hey, we're just gonna make everyone happier. We had a company-wide meeting, and I would just say, everyone's gonna be happy now. Our goal this year, I really did this like a dummy, we're all gonna be happy. And I remember looking at all my chefs, they're like, what the hell is happening here? Meeting adjourned. It's almost like at that time I thought you could just download it. It was the kind of grasping you do after getting dumped, when you say anything you can to convince the person you can change. Luckily, thanks to a few people, actually many, many people that are worried about me, I started seeing an executive coach, a recourse that I would have made fun of not too long ago. He was a really, really good one, quite famous, and he does one pro bono client a year. That was me. After observing the workings of our office and restaurants and spending time at my side, he said to me, it's kind of strange to me that people love working here at Momofuku. Because they have no clue how to be happy. He told me bluntly that I could never make people satisfied and calm in their careers unless I knew happiness myself. And at that point where I'm at now, as we grow, that's the only reason I do this, is to provide for my guys. He tried to get me some balance in my life. He urged me to find balance in my personal life. He urged me to let go, just a little bit. Not long after, I met a remarkable person who took a chance on me and became my wife. It's the first time I've ever had a very real reason to be present for someone that isn't related to my job. I'm sure if you ask Grace, she will tell you that I still got a lot of work to do. I'm a slow learner. Another thing my coach suggested was that I try to listen more to my employees. It's funny, I thought I always did, but I'm very selective. We weren't a noodle shop anymore. We're a growing company with actual infrastructure, so why can't I stop imposing and judging and be more of a cheerleader? Strangely enough, I had the opportunity to test this idea for the first time in Sydney again. Late 2015, we had a change in team. One of the happiest people I know is Paul Carmichael, someone I've known and Christina's known for many years, one of the best chefs out there. He agreed to leave his position here in New York with us to move to Australia and take over the kitchen at Saobo. Before he left, I made it a point to give him a general sense of direction. Destroy everything that we've done. Do what you want to do. Make celebratory food. Try and create an environment where the staff engages customers because they want to, not because they have to. Create a new kind of hospitality for us, representing Momofuku in Australia. At this point in our group's history, the restaurant shouldn't be this weird theater where people are paying to watch cooks channel their rage, and the food is just a byproduct. Paul ended up doing food inspired by Barbados and other Caribbean influences. Where it's crazy that he's doing it in Australia, but it makes sense because he finally has the tropical ingredients to work with. It's nostalgia done in a new way and our attempts at resolving conflicts, not generating them. This year, Paul and Kylie Javier Ashton, our GM, they regained the #1 ranking in Gourmet Traveler. I had very little to do with it. And maybe that's exactly why it feels like one of the greatest achievements we've ever had at Momofuku. I actually enjoyed hearing the news. I usually hate good news like this. We are trying to implement similar dynamics in all parts of Momofuku, and I'm excited to see the company mature into something new, knowing that we now face a different kind of conflict than we did when we started out. The one thing that we're dealing with now is how to achieve the same goals with a fundamentally different set of tools. It's not so different than what Will and Daniel were talking about as Made Nice grows. To never forget what makes Momofuku Momofuku, but to do it in a way that isn't only more pleasant, it's just smarter. Actually, that would be a bit disingenuous for me to say that the goals are the same. We want to reach higher, new heights. We're not there yet, but we're open to trying something new for the first time in a long time. Thank you very much.